Flash has one hell of a legacy online. There's the obvious stuff, like the existence of Last Stand and Deep Sleep outside of Armor Games' website. There's also, of course, internet mainstay Newgrounds. I still remember watching that one Eddsworld animation for Braindead that was there. Thing is, even before its deprecation in 2017 and end of life in 2020, the support for Flash was already on the way out, so 2016, a group of Flash creators came together and formed a little development team known as Massive Monster. Under this banner, they would make the Adventure Pals in 2018 and Never Give Up in 2019. Sometime later, they put out a game published by Best Video Game Label Ever of 2016, 2017, and 2021. If their Steam page is to be believed, indie icon Devolver Digital. That game is Cult of the Lamb. It would be a massive understatement to say Cult was a success. Setting aside briefly the fact that this little indie title sold 1 million copies its first week, and later at least 3.5 million copies as of January of this year, it made one hell of a splash on social media. Its charming style lent itself really well to the world of fandoms, with fan art and fan comics and cosplays, some of which Massive Monster themselves directly approved of and interacted with. One of these cosplayers being the very same friend who told me to play this game over a year ago. Sorry, I'm me, and I'm nothing if not capable of forgetting to do a thing. There is a catch with this affection, as there always tends to be with especially stylized video games of the, let's say, darker variety. While the fans were busy doing fan things about this game they were fans of, there were others who weren't as fond of the title. I suppose it was bound to happen when you title your game Cult of the Lamb, with the primary story and gameplay element being building up a cult, but the inability of others to accept contrary viewpoints to their own and/or inability to accept that a video game is only a reflection of reality when it is clearly defined as being so is no reason to be an ass in response, regardless of how much of an ass they were in the first place. This has been the obligatory don't be an ass and harass people segment of the video. So, 3.5 million copies, a still thriving fandom years after release, regular updates plus take them if you want them, ignore them if you don't, cosmetic DLCs, all backed by a major indie publisher in the form of Devolver Digital. Here's the question, is Cult of the Lamb worth it? Despite its potentially deceptive appearance, Cult of the Lamb is, mechanically at least, pretty simple. It's split pretty clean down the middle with the cult management colony sim on one side, and the action-oriented dungeon crusading on the other. As to the former, the followers of your cult require some basic things to live. You've got your expected standards, like needing to eat and needing to sleep, but there's one other major factor that's largely unique to this game: faith. You naturally have some tools at your disposal to provide for them these things that they need because they are almost entirely incapable of caring for themselves without your say-so. A trait so pervasive it even carries over into other games. For food, you have a place to cook and later a place for your followers to themselves cook, only after directly telling them to do so, of course. For sleep, you've got varying tiers of potential beds for them to sleep in. Faith is the interesting one, though. There's a temple to deliver sermons to your cult, as well as perform rituals with them. There are also actions like blessing you can take that can change based on the upgrades you've got for your cult. Some of these things can also raise the loyalty of your followers, which in turn increases potential faith and enables the use of certain other rituals. The traits that followers can come with can also dictate and influence the way that they interact with things, though in my experience not too drastically. I've never turned down any potential follower, regardless of if they have any or even if they only have negative traits. In fact, I don't know how it is in other difficulties, given that I went with medium for this review since it's developer recommended, but the management aspect here doesn't seem that difficult. Initially it can be a bit tricky while you're still figuring out the game's mechanics and gathering relevant materials for the things you need, but once you've got the hang of it and have specific buildings up and running, there really isn't anything overall too strenuous to deal with. It only gets easier over time, but it can reach the point where sometimes you taking care of the cult's needs ends up feeling tedious more than anything else. In terms of automating their actions, it's not as nice as I'd like it to be. It can be annoying when you've got two separate janitor stations only to come back from a crusade to find that none of your followers have figured out which end of the broom is meant to clean with. Followers also won't cook unless you tell them to, I guess because you carry around the ingredients yourself and there's no way to drop them off at a kitchen, which is unlike seeds and fertilizers for farming. Followers also occasionally have quests to give, which, as with the overall management elements, become easier to complete over time. The quests naturally have varying requirements and aren't too difficult to manage most of the time. The biggest catch with them is their time limit. As to the latter, Delving into the 4 different regions of the game to gain potential spoils that come in varying forms is what the game directly terms crusading. You have your weapons, which in their presentation I love. The crown that you wear just becomes the weapon. It's a nice touch. Later upgrades also grant them a special attack dependent on the kind of weapon, of which there are 6 different types: sword, dagger, gauntlet, axe, hammer, and blunderbuss. Of course, they can also come in different varieties once you've unlocked them at your temple. It doesn't change the moveset, but they do have a passive effect applied to the weapon, such as granting a chance to heal on kill or poisoning enemies you hit. There are also curses, which despite the name aren't actually detrimental, to you anyway. They're a secondary ability that, like with the special attack of your weapon, costs fervor to use, that being a resource that drops from enemies when you kill them, though in the case of bosses it drops when they're damaged. Relics are equipment with varying effects that charge when attacking enemies, except for those marked as fragile, which means they're items you can only use one time. Not all equipment is made equal, of course. The curse Hounds of Fate is fucking monstrous, and Touch of the Revenant and the Dagger special attack are also stellar under the right conditions. All of this is held together with tarot cards, a passive upgrade system represented by tarot cards that you get in your crusades. Don't expect any synergistic combinations like you'd find in Binding of Isaac. The variety just isn't vast enough nor mechanically designed to account for it, because neither side of this game's coin is expansive, nor is it as interconnected as you might hope. Your temple can upgrade your potential abilities on a crusade, and later there's a couple buildings that can affect a run. One lets disciples effectively build up a meter that once filled gives you a bonus on your next crusade. The other lets you convert followers into demons that join you, but I didn't find the crusades too difficult even without them, so I just never used either of these. You can find seeds and various resources on your crusades, but eventual building unlocks through devotion, the primary resource that you gather in your cult, let you effectively farm most major resources theoretically indefinitely, even after you've chopped down all the trees and mined out all the stones in the surrounding area. Food can be grown in farm plots, which can then drop seeds after successful farming, which, even if they don't drop, can be bought after a certain point in the story without a crusade. The shorthand is, if it's necessary, then in all likelihood you don't actually need to crusade for it. Even gold can be obtained directly through the cult, whether by selling shit in a not-at-all cursed chest or by gathering devotion after unlocking all the buildings. Meat can also be farmed through catching spiders at night, fishing at a local pier, buying fish from the nearby fishermen, traps, scarecrows, or even cannibalism when a follower dies if that tickles your fancy. Likewise, as mentioned before, crusades can be used to gather materials, but soon enough you won't need to go on them to satisfy the needs of your cult. So the primary driving force for a crusade eventually becomes the gameplay of the crusade itself, or story progression. While it does lack in mechanical variety, in terms of both what you can do as the player and what you come up against on your crusades, it's still largely satisfactory to survive a combat encounter. The only real problems I actually had were, first, upgrading your lamb through things like the tarot cards can feel a bit too reliant on RNG sometimes, and second, occasionally hitboxes for attacks felt a bit off, both mine and enemies. Environmentally, it can be interesting. The moment I noticed that the mushrooms had faces will be stuck in my head for a little bit. It's also nice there are hints as to if a room isn't one with a combat encounter before you enter it, with stars hanging from the ceiling or weapons crowding the entrance to an adjacent room. In fact, I find that the music and presentation of this game in and out of Crusades to match the exact feel that this game seems to be going for. Dark, but it's cutesy, you know? Bound, helpless. Our captors offer no answers to the reasoning, and not that the knives they wield make it any easier to ask. Their faces hidden beneath hoods that don't betray any trace of regret. nor, for that matter, any hint of malice. So far as we know, this is just how it is. Walking further only confirms the suspicions that we aren't meant to leave here alive, any hope of escape becoming closed off with the same hoods and the same knives. This place, whatever and wherever it is old. Grass grows out from beneath cracks in the stone, moss overtaking elsewhere. The birds peck at bones that don't seem to have any meat or flesh remaining. We do that which we can, walking ever closer to the end of the path, closer to the sigil on the ground, closer to the circle of candles, closer to even more unidentifiable cultists, closer to 4 towering crowned figures draped in religious attire, closer to an executioner. There's only one thing to do in the face of such power, of such absolute control: kneel to be sacrificed, in the hopes that some hitherto unknown prophecy goes unfulfilled, and the one they claim to be a heretic will remain where he currently lies, bound and chained by those he once called family, the one who waits. We, the last of our kind, sacrificed, the lamb felled to preserve the old faith. This is not how the story ends. We are already dead, but we will not remain so for long. The one who waits will not remain waiting for long. There is a dark allegiance made here, amid the fog and chains. The red crown, a promise made between the one who waits and the last lamb. There is a price to power that our captors have forgotten, a price for denying death that we must surely one day learn. The first must be paid its toll in blood, revenge on those who wronged us, those who sought to end our lineage, the bishops of the old faith, he of havoc, chaos, Leshy the worm, ruler of Darkwood, she of hunger, famine, Heket, ruler of Anura, he of blight, pestilence, Kalamar, ruler of Anchored Deep, they of might, war, Shamara, ruler of Silk Cradle. These 4 condemned us to death and will only live long enough to regret that failure. After denying the bishops their death, the game actually plays pretty slick. Attacks can be pulled off mid-roll and can even occur immediately after rolling, and vice versa. Ratau, with his cute little paper crown, offers some personal expertise to help us out. One room later, I get a prompt to dodge roll in the middle of a dodge roll. I think I prefer Ratau's teaching methods, personally. Otherwise, there isn't too much going on here, as one would expect from the tutorial area of the game, save for rescuing my first follower. Tianon, huh? Nah, you're Kuma now, and you're gonna work immediately. Don't feel bad, though. You won't be alone. We're stuck working, too, dealing with the basics and, in the process, changing the HUD to better represent the cult's needs. Cooking Fires checked out the list. It's got the most basic of minigames, clicking in the green. We're gonna have to crusade again, though, on account of needing more followers and money to build a shrine. Don't have to worry about sleep at the moment, which is good. It even looks like the day-night cycle hasn't been activated yet. It is here that we see the 4 entrances to the 4 regions of the game. In order to get past any of these doors, we need a set amount of followers dependent on the door, which interestingly means you can access them at theoretically any time as long as you've got the followers to back it up. In this case, for the first domain, we'd need 1 follower, so with Kuma at our side, we shoot a pillar of flame into the sky and open the first of 4 trials. The lands of the Bishop Leshy, Darkwood. Now, as the game's environments go, Darkwood is the most basic and the most frustrating for me because I wanted to make a Darkwood joke. It's a forest, littered by aged and decrepit stonework. Our first foray only nets us a Crusader's blade at the start, the most basic sword literally possible. In this first floor here, we also get our first necklace, an item that can be gifted to followers with potentially beneficial effects, and after clearing the rest of the floor, introduced to Clownic, the vendor for these less than traditional tarot cards. He will always have at least 1 card available anytime you see him, which is a freebie, and later has a little pedestal thing that, with some gold, nets you another card. Now that dealing, as it's called, has a cooldown, so don't expect to be able to grab both every time you see him. We also meet up with Fornius, a shopkeeper. At first, her selection is cosmetic, decorations for the cult, or potential forms for followers. She also has on a golden pedestal a tarot card unlock, Ambrosia. Can't afford it right now, but it's nice to know it's there. Continuing on, crusading forward, and Leshy, being the first bishop, doesn't do much in the way of aggravating us in our crusades, short of the usual taunting. Less than effective, of course. We nab one more tarot card just before combating the first boss, Amdusius, a follower of Leshy's that tries to stop us. And as bosses go, Amdusius is just nothing in comparison to the later ones. Again, tutorial boss, not exactly a surprise. 3 things Wormy here can do. First, he can spawn another smaller worm. He can also charge up a ramming attack, and spit up little balls of what I can only assume to be acidic phlegm. Not a challenge at all, looking back on the footage. In fact, I think it probably could have been much more aggressive than I was, but that's hindsight for you. Oh man, look at how scared he looks. Oh, Leshy can't hurt you anymore, man. Come on, come with me. Unfortunately, it looks like we'll need to do a few more crusades before we can get to Leshy himself, so it's back to the cult we go. Ratao's there to greet us, reminding us about the shrine. Worshipping at a shrine builds up devotion, which builds up to give you divine inspiration, which is then used to unlock buildings, and once you've used enough, it unlocks the ability to use divine inspiration to upgrade the shrine itself. A tech tree. It's a tech tree. First unlock is the temple, a place of worship for sermons and rituals. That changes the HUD one more time, so now we have a sick bar, a food bar, and a faith bar. Ratao, following the first sermon, mentions the existence of doctrines. These are exactly what the name would suggest. They are guidelines that influence the cult in some way. Another crusade, a new weapon type, axe, and Ratao bestowing the gift of curse onto us. Good times. Fast forward, boss number 2, Valafar. If you've noticed the worm motif, you would not be wrong. Boy has hops and balls of fire. Like with Amdusius, I probably could have gotten more aggressive, but hindsight continues to be hindsight. All it means is another follower for the cult. More followers, more crusades, another boss, Barbados. Big ol' worm covered in spines that can shoot out of the ground to shank your woolly ass, adding in his sporadic acid salvos, and this fight's about paying attention to positioning. Still, not too difficult, but he's the last roadblock between us and the first bishop. This is your spoiler warning, by the way. This is where you get off the ride, and this is where you get back on. Good? Good. I didn't want those guys to see this dice minigame anyway. Leshy wants our head almost as much as we want his. I mean, yeah, the one who waits did tear out his eyes, but the 4 bishops, killed us, so I think we might be a bit more in the green in terms of morality here. The pathway to the worm is marked with even more overgrowth than our execution grounds. Vermilion camellias match the burning red torches fastened to similarly aged pillars guiding our way. In the distance can be heard faint chanting, or perhaps that's apprehension playing tricks on you, and the candles decorating the entrance to the altar's grounds have sat still for far too long, leaving behind congealed streaks of melted red wax, suggesting that these still burning candles can no longer be moved from their position. Candles perhaps permanently affixed in place because they did what candles are known to do. Leaves you to wonder whether or not the bishops can appreciate the irony. The skulls only add to this macabre showcase, and Leshy's cultists surround Darkwood's ruler, preparing to give him everything that they have and all that they are to enable him to win the coming battle. The bishops of the old faith are nothing if not theatrical in their presentation of power. It is a respectable trait, one that I even admire, but it is no substitute for the control they claim to own. Leshy in combat is the first true challenge that this game can throw at you. It would be foolish to believe that all that he of Havoc can do is shout and inflict blunt force trauma on himself. He can also cause spikes to erupt out of the ground and spawn in adds to give him some backup. Now, those alone would make a more credible threat than the 3 that came before him, but once you throw in his painful green balls, the spikes he shoots from the dirt when he himself moves, and his massive leaps to burrow himself, and he is an active test to see how much you've been paying attention to the game's mechanics. I still think he's the easiest of the major bosses this game has on offer, but the first big boy has a tendency to be the easiest in any game, so that's a given, and thus forgiven. Leshy falls, and our reward lies still beating in our hands. The worm could only drown in the difference between our might, lost like a grain of sand before a tidal wave. Our next 2 targets are Heket and Calamar, the former first. Heket rules over Anura, the second region we can crusade through, but before entering its bounds, we need to do some minor crusading for the cult. For a start, the place could use some upgrades, some more beds for followers, a place to farm, more open space. Someone wants some of those camellias as well, so Darkwood shall remain our stomping grounds for a little bit longer. Leshy doesn't approve, as can be garnered by breaking his statue and beating his ass a second time, making his opinions just as worthless as they were prior to his first death. Managed to nab the standard ritual you'd think a cult to have after doing so, sacrifice of the flesh. Further Darkwood foraging brings Witness Agaras to our feet. Wait, what? You thought I'd just go into more detail about what it can do like it did with all the others? Nah, I gotta leave some mystery here. I'm already gonna be talking about the bishops. 1 refinery, 1 stockade imprisonment, 1 stone mine, 1 lumber yard, 1 sacrifice, a relic introduction, 1 each of seed and fertilizer silos, 1 outhouse next to the stockade to make them really regret dissenting, 1 healing bay because flowers are an even better cure for the plague than medicine, 1 follower cured of their dissenting ways, which I'm sure the local outhouse had no sway in, 1 seed shop visit, 1 concerningly large pile of shit, 1 harvest totem, though really it's just a windmill. All this before actually entering Heket's domain. Her lands, collectively known as Anura, hold the same stonework as what's found in the other regions, but there's also a surplus of mushrooms growing just everywhere. A fungal firmament for famines festering fortresses and front lines founded from frog foes. For friendly faces, foster frankly few familiar followers. There's some annoying enemies here too, these bats chief among them. Any enemy that can get out of my range and more importantly out of my sight while still attacking or preparing to attack is shit. Can't dodge what you can't see, right? Despite that, Honor itself is pretty chill. Like I said before, the 2 halves of this game aren't necessarily super extensive. Gusian, Elgos, and Zapar are your pre-bishop bosses that need to be beaten, but before that is something I actually really like. So the 4 bishops have some kind of thing going on for them while you traverse their respective regions. Leshy being the odd one out. He's the most boring of these 4 on account of being the only one without a unique trait to deal with when crusading Darkwood. But Heket deals with you by fucking with your followers directly. A problem you can't fix immediately since you're on a crusade. Heket is also known as Famine. She will straight up summon one of your followers like poor Kuma here and inflict this trait on them, starving them instantly. I really like this idea. It adds even more personality to the regions and the threat that the 4 bishops pose. And the crusades are short enough that the bit itself isn't overdone. After the bishop is beaten, that isn't something that can happen anymore within their region, which story-wise makes sense and gameplay-wise directly rewards the player by removing the threat. It's all good. The Heket fight isn't much of a pushover on an average crusade either, which we discover after Kuma officially became a disciple and after renovating the base. Yeah, I spent enough time before dealing with Heket that the shrine itself has become fully upgraded and, I mean, look at this place. Before leaving to face off with She of Hunger, Kuma requests us to make a specific sacrifice. Kuma herself. It's a sad day. I had intended to ascend her when the time was right, especially since she's already died of old age and was brought back almost immediately, but I can't deny her this request. There's only one place to take my anger out on. Heket, I find, is more difficult than Leshy, but not because of her attacks themselves. It's her ads. She's got little poppers peppering the battlefield, and occasionally she belches out bundles of flies. Heket herself tends to stay a fair distance away, shooting at her tongue as needed. Unfortunate for her, this isn't an average crusade, and I have a dagger. I kill her in enough time that her bigger buddies die alongside her as soon as they spawn in. Okay, well, maybe the chapter title doesn't quite work. Calamar isn't a fish, he's a squid. The boy's a mollusk, but mollusk murder doesn't quite have the same ring to it, so fried fish it is. Before anything else, though, I have to keep a promise. Kuma, my first follower, my first disciple, you will be missed. Keeping this promise lessens our numbers, so we'll need to bolster the ranks somehow. A ritual of resurrection is probably the best bet, given how immediately it can be performed. Everyone, allow me to introduce you to Kuma. I didn't think that I'd be able to do that, honestly. I thought that, what with the Eldritch Tentacle and everything, she couldn't come back, and I'm just happy to be wrong. For once, there's not as much wasted time before heading into Anchored Deep. As the name suggests, this place has some serious water motifs. Jellyfish make up the local wildlife that isn't trying to murder you as opposed to the other jellyfish that is. Less nice is Calamar's trait. Known as He of Blight, the waterbound bishop is keen on spreading sickness among the populace. We've got enough flowers to deal with it though, so it's only a matter of getting home in time to stop the spread from hitting some kind of vomit-induced death spiral. The First Crusade also shows me that, despite its potential damage output, I do not like the hammer, it is just too slow. There's some more renovating done before Calamar, but not as much as before. We still managed to hit the point with the shrine that now devotion is converted directly into gold since there's nothing else to unlock and sermons only raise loyalty and faith now. Along the way, Shimura brings up how much of a coward Calamar is, an attribute he himself clues us in on by begging us not to murk his ass. His cowardice is a joke. He of Blight, Pestilence, Calamar. He's the first true challenge I dealt with. Boy has a scimitar, a staff, a dagger, and the fucking holy hand grenade of Antioch. Let's start with this. The sword has a very basic slash where he floats over menacingly. He will not stop heading your direction until you're within slashing distance, but that's pretty easily dodged. It's very telegraphed. The dagger has a stab that you might not even get to see depending on your run and general playstyle. The staff brings in his cronies, of which there are generally two varieties, exploders and jumpers. His holy hand grenade can shit out fireballs in a few different ways, and on top of all of that, he, like his prior fallen siblings, gets more dangerous with some more moves the further the fight goes on and the lower his health gets. Calamar is the first of two bosses I did not beat on my first try. He is a tough cookie, tough enough that I briefly take a break from my repeated attempts to off him by decorating the cult again. Finally killing Calamar leaves Shimura, ruler of Silk Cradle. The land here is what you'd likely expect, populated by spiders and covered in webs that can be converted eventually into attire for your followers. The blunderbuss finally makes its appearance here, and there are enemies with multiple hitboxes among their multiple body parts, so it's a nicely timed arrival. In terms of theming, I probably like Anchor Deep more, but I prefer Silk Cradle's enemies, which, thanks to Shimura, include some familiar faces. They of Might, War. Shimura truly lives up to their name. Their trait, summoning followers that we are given no choice but to fight, and when they die, they die. On the other hand, Shimura does clue us in on some details that we otherwise might not have known. To quote them, "He waits by the rocks of the darkened sea, at the foot of the long sudden drop. Within the maw of pointed teeth beasts, the stutter of the heart then stopped. He was the fifth bishop of the old faith, our brother, the one who waits. Back then he was known by the name Narender, but as millennia wore on, he grew discontent with his role. He began to question. He was gluttonous in his ambition, and in my impotence I loved him. For it, I lost my mind. For it, he lost his freedom. Can you fathom such betrayal, Lamb? Of your own turned against you. I am not what I once was. Though no longer wise, I am no fool. I know the end draws near. I can take some comfort in confession. The blame hangs heavy round my neck. I introduced him to ideas of change, for my domain is knowledge, and it is ever evolving. An organic state of being for myself, but for him? Most unnatural. Death cannot flow backward. It was I who had him chained, forced into subjugation by the four of us. Have you thought of what awaits you once your task is completed? What is to become of you? The lamb is, after all, the sacrificial beast, bred to slaughter. If I cannot stop you, then I can at least prepare you for the suffering to come. I envy you not. While you may yet kill me, still I would not trade places. It is time to draw this ugly business to a close. He waits at the point of the sharpened blade, the fate that cannot be outrun. He waits in the eye of the raging storm at the end of the long day done. He of havoc, he of blight, she of hunger, they of might. 5 becomes 4, becomes 3, becomes 2, becomes 1, becomes nothing. Shimura is a fair amount more aggressive than Calamar, but like the others that aren't Calamar, falls on the first try. In fact, the fight only lasted about a minute and a half. I was definitely carried by the Blunderbuss Hounds combo here. Shimura is very melee focused and just as aggressive as you'd think war to be, taking plenty of opportunity to land right on top of you, and they've got a few variants of a single range attack if you think that melee is a bit too close for comfort. The occasional spiders dropping from the ceiling should be considered as well. Here though, you can't see too much of it since, again, your boy was carried. With the bishops of the old faith gone, there's nothing left to keep the one who waits chained. A few hours of farming and renovating and one last look at the cult before we meet our benefactor. This fight has 3 stages, and it's probably the most difficult in the game, for one very important reason. Unlike with the bishops, you don't have any tarot cards or any relics for the fight. It's just your weapon and your curse and you. If you're lucky and have certain buildings in your cults, you might have some slight bonuses based on eating food or a disciple shrine, maybe even convert some followers into demons if you can justify it, but other than that, you're truly on your own here. I'm also entirely unsure if that's possible, since it's not something I myself tested for the fight. The first stage is made up of 2 fights, first against Bale, then against Aim, the Guardians of Narendar. Bale's more melee-oriented, but has a couple of chain-based attacks to supplement his staff-smacking attitude. Aim likewise has chains to aid him, but primarily uses balls of fire to potentially burn you down, pun intended. Some even boomerang back around after reaching the edge of the map. Stage 2 sees Narendar himself join the fray. He has fireballs, guys, and chains like an S&M show with shit pyrotechnics. The big issue here is Narendar's a big cat who can take up a fair amount of real estate visually. Normally, if you're close enough to an object, it'll become semi-transparent so you can see yourself moving around. You can see this most often at your cult, but here getting close is more opportunistic than normal. One of my attempts ended because I moved into a fireball I couldn't see because both myself and the ball were behind Narendar. If I'm being honest, the real treat for this whole matchup is the final stage. Narendar yells and screams that it isn't over yet, and you fall even further below. A pitch-black area slowly becoming illuminated with fires. Burning upside-down crosses sparking into existence one by one until eventually dark gives way to light and you can see him for what he truly is. The one below. The one who waits. He who lays a soul to rest. Narendar. Death. Calling us a false idol, his eyes escape their sockets, and the followers of the Cult of the Lamb rise from the red waters. Each bound to a cross all their own. A forced audience witness to the price of denying death his crown. The key to this final stage is dealing with the eyes, since Narender's body is invincible on account of being out of bounds. No, the health bars attached to the 3 eyes roaming the field, each of which can be killed and thus removed from the remaining combat based on damage done to the total health bar. It isn't necessarily an easy endeavor, however. The movement patterns themselves are entirely random, so there's no banking on that for any sense of familiarity. A good thing though is that, as according to the wiki, they don't have any kind of iframes outside of burrowing, so they can be attacked at any time without worrying about a wasted attack, barring when you miss, of course. The eyes are only capable of doing ranged attacks, but Narender's still a danger. You might not be able to reach him, but death can certainly reach you. More balls, more chains, all of which speed up as the fight goes on, and you need to beat all of these stages in one attempt to win the combat. When he at last falls, there's an option. Spare, kill. In this case, Narender shall spend the rest of his days under our leadership. One day he shall become a true disciple alongside Kuma, but for the moment he is no more than a follower, another member of the cult of the Lamb. Sacrifice reborn, vessel. Ascend once more and take true form. No longer a servant, no less than a god. Cult of the Lamb is what I mean when I bring up indie gems. It's a game made with love and care by a team who know what they're doing and enjoy doing it. I greatly enjoy its presentation, its art style, and its attempt to blend 2 largely differing gameplay elements into one cohesive game. I didn't even cover everything either. There's a whole ass post-game portion that I didn't record which amps up everything a notch or 2. But the game isn't perfect. Hitboxes can feel wonky sometimes, especially if you've used one of the relics that makes you bigger or smaller. A select few enemies' size can be detrimental to fighting them, and neither side of the game is as deep nor as interwoven as I would have liked. Now, if you like cutesy artistry plastered onto a normally dark aesthetic, don't have much time to play games, and want something you can do a run through while still feeling like you've made some genuine progress, enjoy gameplay that can tie directly into lore, or somewhat experimental attempts to see how differing gameplay elements can work together, under the assumption that they even can, I recommend it. While not the most deep of gameplay experiences, what Cult has on offer is still solid overall, and its art style and thematic elements are as well done as the rest of the game. Plus, an average run isn't going to take too long. Even when I did the whole loot goblin thing and chopped down every single blade of grass in front of me, it only ran me about 10 minutes from the beginning to the ending of an average run. Hell, if you like any of these things but want them to be more in-depth, I would still recommend it on sale. It is still very solid. But if you're looking for a game with colony management on a significantly more personal level, or gameplay mechanics that offer truly incredible variety, or min-maxing to an absurd degree, I wouldn't recommend it, and this is why. On the gameplay side, there are a total of 6 weapon types with 6 varieties outside of their default form that have specific passive effects. 5 different types of curses with 4 different varieties therein, 37 different relics, a portion of which are just blessed or damned variants of other relics, 43 possible tarot cards, but the majority of those upgrades are statistical in nature, like getting a 20% increase in damage during the daytime. Flat number progression's cool, but in my opinion anyway, it's not as cool as gaining new mechanical effects, like dropping a bomb when you dodge roll. Surface level, it sounds like all of these in combination would garner a lot of different capabilities in combat, but in terms of execution, you can only ever have 1 weapon and 1 curse guaranteed at any given time. Then, depending on how your run turns out, a relic and a handful of tarot cards, neither of which are promised due to the nature of the game. That is a standard attack combo, whatever the curse does, then some other stuff if you're lucky and pull a relic and some gameplay changing tarot cards. It makes it a bit harder to have the god runs you might get in Risk of Rain or Dead Cells, but it also means that a lot of the runs can feel a bit samey and just lack in variety. On the management side of things, you only have 3 needs to pay attention to: hunger, cleanliness, and faith. Faith is really easily filled when it's low. Just get a bunch of people together and bless one of your followers. Local unrelated followers will come over to become blessed as well, which is convenient as going around blessing them all individually would be a hassle. This gains you 5 faith, as well as increases the loyalty of all involved by a small amount. If you get the doctrine that replaces bless with inspire, it still raises loyalty, but the faith gain jumps to 7 in place of the original 5. And in either case, This is per follower, blessed or inspired, regardless of if they were the one directly interacted with or just in the vicinity. Cleanliness is simple. Once you've got the janitor station and an outhouse or two, you're good to go. The only poop that you'll need to clean up manually are the ones that aren't typical messes, and since there aren't many followers at the start of the game, you won't be spending too much time cleaning up after them. Hunger is also similarly easy, with farm plots that your followers can run while you're away, a kitchen that they can cook in while you're away, plus a doctrine that can mean your followers no longer lose faith upon eating grass, which, if my reading online is any indication, is almost a necessity on higher difficulties. I'll grant that all of these can be difficult at first, but they can also quickly snowball into something that very much isn't. If what you want is more in-depth aspects to either side of this coin, Binding of Isaac for combat with large variety, and RimWorld for colony management are pretty obvious choices. Cult, unfortunately, loses against both in that comparison of its disparate elements. Overall, however, I would say get it. It's just fun, and it's cheap, and it gets updates pretty regularly by people who aren't going to abandon it anytime soon. I'm gonna go write about something I've been thinking about and cooking up on the back burner for a little while, so be prepared for that, or don't. I'm not your dad. I'll see you later. Story out.